Hi, I'm Steve with the Shoebill Studio, and welcome to the Zombicide Undead or Alive All-In Buyer's Guide. This is my all-in pledge from Kickstarter back in 2021, and everything over here is what's considered retailly available. Everything over here is what's considered Kickstarter exclusive. In this video, we're going to go through each of these boxes together and talk a little bit about how these boxes change gameplay, what are the unique mechanisms that change the core set experience, so that you can get a better idea about what expansions you'd actually want to include in your Undead or Alive collection. The reality about a lot of these big Kickstarter projects, especially something like Zombicide, is that many of these exclusive products might not actually be something that align with your gameplay tastes. You know, you might spend a ton of money to try to get a hold of, I don't know, long dead walkers, only to be disappointed that it doesn't really shape the gameplay experience of the core set, or maybe even the campaign in a way that, you know, you're satisfied with spending whatever secondary market dollars you had to spend to get a hold of this out of print item. This is not going to be a review. We'll be doing that at a later time, but this is really just so that you can have all of these different things in one place in one video so that you can reference it if you're trying to complete a collection or if you're trying to make an informed decision about which of these things are worth purchasing. All right, so where do we start? There's a lot of things here. Well, I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna start with the core set. The big things that you're getting here are 9 double-sided tiles that are all themed for this sort of western town. You get the 3 double-sided train tiles, as well as 73 zombie minis, including the bowler hat Abomination. And then there's a couple different unique things here. There's the Gatling gun and also the wagon, which are machines that are used sort of during a couple of the different missions. There are the 10 included missions in the back of the manual. And here there are a ton of survivors that are included in the core set. I think there are 14 in total. And most importantly, there are classes that are now introduced in this version of Zombicide. Townsfolk, faithful, brawlers, and then gunslingers. When it's all said and done, this box contains everything that you need to play a game of Zombicide Undead or Alive 1 to 6 players. First up, for the retail available expansions, we've got Gears and Guns, which is the campaign expansion for Undead or Alive. This campaign spans over 10 missions that allows you to carry survivors and their equipment between missions. There's also the RPG Lite character upgrade sort of expansion bits where, you collect what's called campaign XP, and then, between missions you're allowed to spend that to get new campaign skills that are often good, but I wouldn't say there's like a ton of really in-depth choice making in these upgrade systems. The other thing that's important to note about the campaign is each mission has its own set of custom objective cards. They give the objectives a reason for existing, so often in the core sets of these games, it's just sort of like, go to this thing, flip the X over, is it blue, is it green, is it red, who cares? These are oftentimes related to story beats, or they interact with the map in a particular way. And they also oftentimes have a lot to do with getting the pacing up and going at a much higher rate than a typical core set game. So that's more or less the campaign-related RPG elements of this expansion. Let's talk about some of the new systems that are introduced here in Gears and Guns. Most notably is the Steam system, which is this like white plume that I have here that looks a little bit like an old-timey light bulb if you don't look too close. But also there are these switches that go along with them, and they're all centered around the custom tiles. There are 6 double-sided custom tiles that come with this expansion that all feature, or most of them feature, what's called a Steam machine. These are interesting because they affect board state, but also they introduce Steam as a resource that survivors have to work with, manipulate, and in some cases avoid. In these campaign missions, you also have this dial here that represents how much Steam is like in the overall system of whatever mission that you're working with. And there's a couple different colors here. It's white, and then at 14, which is where it gets to yellow, Steam that is on the board and is actively like shooting out in these white plumes can damage your survivors. But at red, it actually ends that mission scenario. So there's a bit of a timer that's involved in these campaign missions that, if you're somebody that really hates timers, you might want to think twice before you look any further into this campaign expansion. Steam is a resource and a system that kind of touches on every aspect of this campaign expansion. Most notably, Steam can be harnessed to improve the combat value of your weapons. When you activate Steam power for a particular equipment or weapon or whatever, you're going to be universally looking for the dice number, because anytime that you activate Steam, it adds Steam dice to your roll. What's unique about Steam dice is that for a 1, they have this depleted symbol, and if you roll that 1, it depletes your weapon and makes it unusable until you refill it with Steam. So how do you refill these super-powered weapons once you've used them a few too many times, pushed your luck, and run out of Steam? Well, you can fill them up right at the source, if you've got an active Steam machine. You could also depend on the new Engineer class to refill your Steam-powered weapons. One of their class skills is they can empty a fully loaded Steam weapon into a depleted weapon and, basically trade one for the other. The other way that you can deal with reloading a Steam weapon is actually through a new system that's called the Invention deck. But specific to reloading your depleted Steam weapons is the Steam bottle. While we're on the topic of inventions and Steam bottles, let's just explain a little bit more about what inventions are in the first place. Most of these are just equipment items. They don't take up space in your inventory, but a lot of them grant unique skills or some interesting stuff. Like for instance here, I've got jump boots and then marksman goggles, and they do exactly what you would think they do. The jump boots grant you the skill jump, and the marksman goggles grant you the skill marksman. The last Steam-related thing that I think we need to talk about is the new Abomination, the Steam monster. And the Steam monster goes around and breaks the Steam machines when they're not busy beating you up. This is important, especially toward the end of missions, because like I said, Steam can hurt you, and if you have a bunch of broken Steam machines that are basically impeding your way to get across the map, do you have the HP to run through this scalding hot steam to get to wherever you need to go to extract from a map? So there's a lot of different things that come down to Steam in this game, and the Steam monster Abomination is just another wrench, no pun intended, thrown into the works. I think the last thing that I want to mention is the survivor breakdown. There are 4 new engineer survivors that are introduced, and then another 6 that are split 2 brawler, 2 townsfolk, and 2 gunslingers. So there are 10 new survivors included here. There are no faithful included in this expansion. I do think that you could use survivors from the core set in this campaign expansion. I do think that they would be at a slight disadvantage because the core set obviously does not have Steam-related skills that allow them to interact with the Steam specially and specifically. All of that being said, these campaign expansions oftentimes are some of my favorite products from these big Kickstarter pledges, mostly because they're, retail developed, so they've been given the amount of time that they deserve to sort of be tested and shaped. But I love the new mechanics and the things that sort of just make the gameplay more interesting than just the standard core set. So that is Gears and Guns, the campaign expansion for Zombicide, Undead or Alive. All right, up next is another retail available expansion called Running Wild. And this introduces a sort of a new game mode that's called Rider Mode, which you can see here there's a lot of Survivor minis in front of me. And that's because Rider Mode is exactly what it sounds like. You get to ride a horse. And because of that, there are 2 minis per survivor introduced in this expansion. Their riding mode and then their standard survivor walking around on the ground mode. There are no missions included in this. It's just the game mode and 1 Abomination. The Abomination is pretty good. It is the Nightmare Abomination, which makes it so that all of the zombies on the board that deal 1 wound per attack instead deal 2. This is a pretty deadly abomination that I think is a great addition to the game. Let's talk a little bit more about what the rider mode actually has to offer. So like I said, there are 6 survivors here. There are 2 brawlers, 2 townsfolk, and 2 gunslingers that have all of the standard class abilities that you know from the core set. There are no engineers, there are no faithful here. But rider mode is a thing that you can sort of choose to do as many times as you want to do in your turn. Getting on and off your horse doesn't cost any action points, but it does have some significant advantages and also some pretty real disadvantages as well. When you're in rider mode, you get 1 die added to any melee combat that you involve yourself in. You also get 1 extra zone per move action that you take, so you're getting double the movement. You're on a horse, that makes sense. And then you can activate Slippery once per turn. And for those of you who don't know what Slippery is, it basically means that you can move out of a zone with zombies for no additional cost, just the standard 1 AP. But the trade-off is basically you can't use any other movement-related actions or skills. For instance, the brawlers, they can't do a charge attack when they're on horseback. While you're mounted, you're not going to be able to use things like sprint, hit and run, or jump. And then the real limitation that rider mode has is it's really only allowed in street zones and in the train car. You can't go into the locomotive engine, you can't go indoors or onto balconies. But one thing that I do think is very interesting is this little thing over here, which is I've not punched out what are effectively the game's version of when you get off of your horse, it becomes one of these flat tokens, which is an unmounted, unmanaged horse. And that horse is a companion that can draw aggro on the table at any time. So I do like that it involves the problematic like companion death, like your horse could die. I think that the RP and homebrew potential is really where this set shines. I could imagine, you know, some weird like The Witcher crossover where, you know, Geralt is trying to make sure that Roach never dies. It's this, you know, sort of sacred relationship for them. So to come into town and have the possibility of your horse being killed by zombies, I think that might be one of the more interesting aspects of this expansion. Like I said, because there is no additional missions in this little leaflet, there's just the Abomination and then these 6 different survivors with the, you know, the rider mode. Your mileage may vary. I don't think that you'll see a ton of use to this expansion if you are not somebody who is interested in kind of creating your own scenarios. That being said, it might just be the easy mode. I could see this being really nice to have 3 survivors on your team that could kind of just patrol the streets and, you know, take out the zombies that are outside much easier than the folks who are not mounted. So fantastic models, but this expansion is just this game mode and one very, very powerful Abomination. All right, these are the last retail available expansions, and these are actually 2 separate boxes, the extra player upgrade set and then the tile set. Let's start with the extra players upgrade set. This basically allows you to play with up to 12 players in Undead or Alive. And whether that sounds like a good time or a bad time to you, it's not really the point. The thing that you're gonna find in this box is starting weapons, plastic trays, the little dynamite pegs, and the colored bases for survivors so that you know who is who out on the board. You now can play with 12 survivors on the board, whether they're all controlled by you, 1 player alone, or whether it's, you know, 12 humans all interacting with a single survivor to make basically like Zombicide the party game. That doesn't sound like fun to me, but what does sound like fun to me is having a giant 12-handed single player mode where I get to try out even crazier team comps. You can still do that regardless of, you know, you could like proxy stuff and just do that without this set, but this makes it official. You get all of the thematically appropriate bits and bobs. The rules also come with this because obviously you would need more zombies spawned in if you had twice the number of survivors, and the rules are as follows. With 7 to 8 survivors, you're going to be spawning an extra zombie spawn card at the starting spawn zone. So in Undead or Alive, that's the yellow spawn zone. At 9 to 10 players, you're going to be doing the extra card at the yellow spawn, but you're also going to be doing extra cards at the orange spawns, the mobile spawn points. And then at 11 and 12 player counts, you're going to be doing an extra spawn card at every single spawn zone. So that's your yellow, your orange, your red Abomination spawns, and then obviously your white body pile ones as well. I can imagine some very fun homebrewing opportunities opened up by both of these products in combination with like something like the core set and Running Wild. You know, you could basically have an entire posse outside that was horseback while you had an entire posse that was running sort of the interior of buildings, and then, you know, everybody would meet up toward the end as you had to kind of come to the ultimate conclusion of, you know, an enormous map that used all these tiles. Which brings us to the tile pack. And the tile pack is also very, you know, self-described. It gives you doubles of all of the tiles, both from the core set as well as from the Gears and Guns campaign expansion. It also has all of the little cardboard tokens that you would get in both of the games. So you've got even more tools for your homebrewing toolbox. One thing that I do think the extra tile pack changes as far as gameplay is concerned is it gives you access to extra Vade Retro tokens. Again, you could proxy this stuff very easily, but the way that Vade Retro works is once you run out of tokens, you're sort of pulling the oldest token, or you're removing whatever token is on the board that you no longer want to use in order to place a new Vade Retro. With the addition of 2 additional tokens, obviously you could have more Vade Retro on the table, affecting zombies if you had enough faithful class types to put the Vade Retro, tokens out on the board. You could also make trains a lot bigger with this set, and that's important because if you wanted to house brew essentially like a mission where the timer was the train coming into town and leaving, you'd essentially have 6 different tiles that could be part of the train that you could use instead of having to recycle the tiles, which you could do, but wouldn't look as nice. And that is the last of our retail available products essentially for Zombicide Undead or Alive. Everything else from here on forward in the video is considered Kickstarter exclusive, oftentimes only purchasable on secondary, market websites like eBay, or there's a ton of different merchants out there that specialize in Kickstarter exclusive content for board games. So let's get started. All right, so first up are likely the most uninteresting Kickstarter exclusives, which are the custom dice for Zombicide Undead or Alive. I don't really care about extra dice. Again, I purchased this particular pledge from a particular aftermarket, Kickstarter pledge company, and so all of the things that were extras were added to this as well. Now, these dice over here are a little bit different, the one in the white box. These are metal Steam dice that are essentially a special metal version of the Steam dice from the Gears and Guns campaign expansion. I really like the quality of these dice, but because they are specific to that campaign, they have some of the iconography from that expansion on them, and therefore are a little bit less like universally applicable to other games that you might want to enjoy some nice, heavy, weighty, good feeling dice that are made of metal in. But these are just standard Zombicide dice. They are literally the same exact dice as the ones that come in the core set. That's all. Kickstarter exclusive dice. Never thought I'd own them, but here we are. All right, so here we are. This is our first Kickstarter exclusive small box expansion, and this is the Long Dead Walkers. It comes with 8 spawn cards and 15 miniatures, and the rule set is effectively that these are walker class zombies, meaning they do 1 damage and require 1 damage to be eliminated, but their special rule set is that they are immune to ranged damage, so they're basically berserkers. If you're familiar with the berserkers from White Death or from Modern, that's what these guys are. You've got to get in their space, go toe-to-toe with them, and take them out with a melee action. I think with the increased spawn rate in Undead or Alive, these guys might pose even bigger threats on the board than they typically do. But I think the value of sets like this is usually in forcing you to pick team comps that you might, not pick all of the time. Let's say you're usually somebody that is ranged heavy. If you involve these guys in the board state, you're gonna be having to have at least 1 or 2 people that can do melee actions effectively. It's always fine to put a melee weapon in a gunslinger's hands. They can do fine with it, but it's always better to have a melee-based character be able to go in and AoE these guys down very, very easily. So that's it for the Long Dead Walkers. They're basically the berserkers for the Undead or Alive universe. All right, our next Kickstarter exclusive expansion is the special guest Paolo Parente Survivor Pack here, which brings 9 new survivors to the table, all of which are designed sort of in the same way that the core set survivors are designed, not in skill choice, but in the lack of Steam skills that would then be compatible with the campaign expansion gears and guns. These guys, I will say, seem a bit more powerful, especially from like blue level, than their core set counterparts. I don't see a real coherent throughput or theme involved here in this box. There are some notable figures like Lucan is, in my opinion, Snoop Dogg. Sable probably is like Scary Spice, or maybe a nod to Beyonce's character in one of the Austin Powers movies. But the thing to know here is the breakdown of classes is kind of weird. There are 6 gunslingers included in this box, 2 brawlers, and 1 townsfolk. So there are no faithful and no engineers. The engineer part makes sense, since this seems like it's more for the core set as an expansion for those survivors. But you know, the lack of an additional faithful, and it's just so heavy in gunslinger, just seems a little bit bizarre. But that's what it is. It's 9 new survivors for you to mostly, I think, enjoy with the core set. All right, our next Kickstarter exclusive expansion is the Steampunk Extras. And this is a survivor set of 9 new survivors. It's got 3 gunslingers, a townsfolk, 1 brawler, and 4 engineers. And with saying that we've got 4 engineers, it goes without saying that this set is geared toward the campaign expansion gears and guns. All of these characters have some sort of interaction and ability to sort of use Steam to their advantage, whether it's skills or whether it's some of the items that come with this set. We've got the Steam Drifter and the Steam Chair, which are some of these starting blue skill items that belong to a couple of these different survivors. But this set is similar to the last set, the Paolo Parente set, in the sense that it's really just extending the survivor roster for one of the larger retail available expansions. In this case, like I said, the campaign expansion gears and guns. So if you're looking to have more breadth and depth as far as different characters that you want to play in the campaign, this is a great option for you to take a look at. Our next Kickstarter exclusive is the small survivor pack, Sister Temperance and her Donkey Whiskey. Now, this is more or less a mini expansion for the Running Wild expansion, which is what introduces rider mode into Undead or Alive. If you've enjoyed that sort of mounted style of combat, maybe you're really into homebrewing that way, this might be a really good pickup for you, because the other thing that's notable about Sister Temperance is she's one of the only faithful class members that you can add to the game without dipping into the very costly Dead West catch-all box that we'll go over at the end of this video. So if you've enjoyed that sort of style of mounted combat offered by Running Wild, and you're looking to add a new faithful class member, this might be a really good pickup for you. And while we're on the topic of Running Wild, let's just mention our next Kickstarter exclusive, which is a complete vanity pickup, and it is the Lone Horse expansion. This includes 6 miniatures of the Lone Horses, which is exactly what it sounds like it is. It's when you get off of your horse in the Running Wild expansion. Typically they gave you just those flat cardboard tokens that represent the horse that you've left, but this allows you to use a full 3D miniature to represent that lone horse. It is kind of nice just because the horses actually become companions that can be killed by zombies, so this gives a little bit more table presence, a little bit more effect as far as something that you feel like you need to make sure doesn't die. But otherwise, it doesn't affect gameplay at all. This is not mechanically responsible for anything. It doesn't bring anything other than just aesthetic to the game. Think the battlements in White Death, or the hedges and barricades in Green Horde, that sort of stuff. It's definitely not necessary to make that expansion work. It's just something that might allow you to, you know, get a little bit better immersion. So that is the Lone Horse pack for Running Wild. Our next Kickstarter exclusive expansion is the Abomination pack, Abominape and Crocosaur. And this just introduces 2 big, chunky, full of flavor abominations to the board. You can use these guys in the core set or in the campaign expansion. They'll work just fine in either. Let's start with how the Crocosaur works on the table. This guy gets a single activation, or a single action per activation, and does 2 wounds every time he attacks. So if you let him swing on you, he's gonna put you down pretty quickly. He requires 3 damage or a dynamite to be eliminated, but he's got a special kind of evade death move, where he's gonna roll a d6 and anything 4 or higher means that he's escaped death. Now, you can totally avoid this mechanism by just throwing double dynamite at him. So, double dynamite means Crocosaur can't even roll his dice and he's just off the table. Now, the Abominape, in my opinion, is significantly more interesting from a mechanic standpoint. What he'll do is, at a range of 0 to 1, whoever is closest, he'll target a survivor and actually just grab them and take them out of the game until he's eliminated. This attack does a damage, but it's basically taking your team down one entire survivor. So you lose 3 to 4 action points per turn as long as the Abominape has your survivor sort of hostage. So it puts a lot of interesting pressure on your team to go out and hunt him down so that they can get that missing survivor back on the board. But otherwise, he's got a lot of the same stats that a normal Abomination would. It's just that special attack that, he scoops somebody up and takes them on a taxi ride and then drops them once he's eliminated. All right, so that's everything for the Abominape and Crocosaur Abomination pack. Definitely something that will give you a good bit more variety than just the standard bowler hat Abomination from the core set or the Steam monster from the campaign expansion. All right, the next Kickstarter exclusive small box expansion is the Abomination pack Deadstock. And this comes with 4 Abominations that are all moderately sized from a miniature standpoint, so a little bit different from the Abominape and Crocosaur pack already, but you get twice the number of unique mechanics with these 4 Abominations. All these Abominations have some of the default stats, like what does it take to kill them? It takes 3 damage or dynamite. They have 1 action per activation. They deal a single damage, this sort of stuff. Now, all of that's detailed in the leaflet, but they're all pretty default from the get. But they all have very cool, unique abilities as well. So let's start with the Blood Bull, which is this guy right here. And Blood Bull does what a bull does. He charges. And so if he's got a survivor in line of sight, on his activation, he will charge 3 spaces to reach his target. It reminds me a little bit of the Red Hair Abomination from the Frozen Fortress and White Death, but this has actually got even more movement, so I think it can be even more deadly on the board. This thing's essentially rushing an entire tile worth of zones to get to its target. All right, next up is the Bison, B-I-Z-I-O-N. And this guy does a pretty interesting thing where any space that it moves into that has survivors, it just automatically fires off an AoE, 1 wound to every survivor in that space. So you can imagine with the rule set that is available in Undead or Alive, where if you run out of miniatures, Abominations get activations. This guy can all of a sudden tear through your turn in 2 activations by killing survivors that he's just moving after. Very cool mechanic, and in my opinion, it adds a depth to positioning that, not many Abominations really force you to consider. All right, next up is the Texas Deadhorn, and this guy's also pretty interesting, but it works more along the lines of sort of chewing through your action economy. Any melee attack in this guy's space or ranged attack against this guy's space basically costs an additional AP. So if you want to attack them, it's going to be 2 AP instead of 1. You got to be really accurate is what I'll say, because you're going to be having to spend and just demolish your action economy to try to get hits against the Texas Deadhorn. And then probably my favorite, which is the Abominabear. And this guy just gets tons of extra activations if you think that you're going to try to attack him. So any melee attack targeting him or ranged attack targeting his space gives him a free extra activation as long as he survives those targetings. So you can imagine not being very accurate against this guy will end up with you in a hurt locker pretty quickly. Abomination packs often offer just a ton of value because they just insert a ton of new mechanics into the core set. You can also play multi-Abomination with these guys. Running 4 or 5 on the board at once really changes the way that the game works. I know Undead or Alive is considered by many people the hardest Zombicide, and so why would you want it to be harder? Because. So, it could be a lot of fun, I think, but these Abomination packs really do offer a ton of value for what they are. All right, that is it for the Deadstock Abomination pack. 4 new Abominations for you to enjoy. And here we are at the final item in the lineup, but also the large catch-all Kickstarter exclusive box, Dead West. Now, this thing is just absolutely packed, like all of these catch-all boxes always are. There's always a bazillion different things going on in them, and honestly, a lot of the value usually lies with the zombies, the abominations. The heroes oftentimes can sort of just become milquetoast because these are not necessarily the designs that made it to the final cut of the core game or the expansions that were sold as retail products, but sometimes there are also some very standout things happening over here as well. This box alone has 51 survivors, 19 of which are townsfolk, 12 are brawlers, 15 gunslingers, and 4 faithful. And then the real heavy-hitting stuff happens when you look at these 13 new abominations that are introduced in this box alone. And like I've said, they are often the thing that introduce the most mechanical difference in these games. So 13 new abominations, I'm sure not all of them are equally interesting as, you know, the ones that are the best, but that's a lot of cool new mechanics to put in your toolbox to play with if you're sort of homebrewing different scenarios and things. You know, you've got everything from an exploding cactus that sort of blows up and does an AoE damage to everybody within range. And then you've got this guy right here who actually has like a whole cycle that he goes through where he's got 3 different heads and he hits really hard. If you get hit by him, you die. It's 3 wounds per hit. But there's lots and lots of different variation happening over here, and that's not even mentioning the daily dual walker zombies, which are kind of a nice addition. They're like sort of weird mini A-bombs, but in reality, they're just walkers that have special abilities. They have problems of their own, but they do offer you even more spice as far as, you know, your gameplay and experience can just be widely different when you have all of these different weird zombies that are doing bizarre things on the table. Over here on the survivor side, just like every giant Kickstarter catch-all that CMON does for Zombicide, there's a ton of sort of cultural reference and pop culture nonsense going on. You're gonna recognize tons and tons of different names. I mean, just right here on the tops of these piles, I've got Butch Cassidy and Wild Bill Hickok, and I didn't try to do that. So all of your favorite Westerns are gonna be covered and sort of like represented to some degree here. But additionally, there is a weapon that's involved in this box as well, and it's Deesba's bow. So this is an equipment piece that Deesba starts with that's only found here in the Dead West box. So there's a lot here, there's a lot to chew on, and you know, the reality about adding something like this to your Zombicide experience is it really is for more experienced players. It's for folks who are looking to take their, you know, Undead or Alive experience beyond those 10 missions that are in the back of the manual. There's a lot here. It's a lot of fiddly stuff that you have to, you know how it works and really kind of manage while you're playing the game. All right, so that's everything in the Zombicide Undead or Alive All-In pledge. I hope that the video was helpful, and if you liked it, make sure to hit the like button. It definitely helps me out a lot. It helps with folks finding this video and being able to search for it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit the subscribe button, especially if you're somebody that enjoys this type of content regarding board games. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. I hope that you have a great one. Cheers.